Hi guys, my name is Sarvan Kumar. I am your economy faculty. Welcome to Rathod's IAS Economic Weekly Series. Guys, we have a lot of economic current affairs which appeared in different newspapers in this week. So without wasting any time, let's discuss the first topic. See, the topic of the day is the old age poverty is getting worse if not addressed soon. So poverty is another important topic which is very much important both from the perspective of GS2 as well as GS3. So first of all, we will understand the basics of it and then we will move into the current affair as usual, right? So first of all, what is the definition of poverty? What is poverty? See guys, understanding any subject starts understanding by its definition. Similarly, if you want to read any kind of a current affair or any kind of a topic, first of all try to define the topic, try to understand the topic. Okay. Now, what is the poverty? Now, many international organizations like World Bank and the IMF came up with different definitions of the poverty. But for the time being, let's have a layman kind of a definition for the poverty. Now, in a layman language, I can define the poverty in such a way, right? Poverty is a lack of ability of the individuals to have some basic goods and survival in their life. Imagine an individual. Imagine he is an individual. If he fails to have some basic needs or basic goods and services required for his survival in his life, he is said to be living in poverty. Now let's take an example and try to understand this poverty, right? See, human being needs a basic goods and services. Human being needs some basic goods and services in their life. Now let's consider what are these basic goods. Say for example, these are like food. The second one is shelter, clothing, right? And apart from that, in the modern race, not only these three are the basic goods, but also the education. The education is also a basic service. And say for example, and rest of say for example, miscellaneous. Let's add it as a miscellaneous. Now, these five are like the basic goods and services required for the survival of a human being. Now, if you fix that these basic goods are required for the survival of the human being, if you once go to the market, you will get a market value for all these five goods. Now let's try to assign the values. Say for example, the food is 20, shelter is 20 and clothing is 20, and for each and every one we just assign the value of 20, and cumulatively the number what we get is 100 here. Now what is this 100 here? It is nothing but, see, imagine he is an individual, and if this individual can spend an amount of 100 rupees, then automatically he can afford all these basic goods and survival in this life. So he is said to be living above poverty. Now say for example, he is earning just an income of 80 rupees. He is just earning an income of 80 rupees. Now he may not get the education. He may not get the clothing. So one of the basic goods and services have been missed in his life. So when one of the basic goods and services is not acquired by this individual in his life, then he is automatically said to be not having all these basic goods and services. So definitely he will be living in the poverty. Right? I hope you understood the concept of poverty here. Right? Now, let me tell you, so this is called poverty. So those who can afford all these basic goods and services, now they are said to be living in poverty. Those who cannot afford, said to be living in poverty. Those who can afford it is said to be living above poverty. Now, the number here 100 is called, technically it is called the poverty line. Technically it is called the poverty line. Right? Now, see. There is two more questions I have given to you here in this. Now, you just understood what is the meaning of poverty. Now, what is income-based measure of poverty or what is expenditure-based measure of poverty? Now, there are two methods in which the poverty can be estimated in India. Right? Not only in India, in any country. Now, just now you have understood the definition of poverty. I hope you understood and it is very clear for you. Now, tell me, see guys, here we are talking about the income. We are saying that, understand this sequence very carefully guys. We are saying that, imagine if this individual is earning an income of, remember this term, income, remember this word income. If this individual is earning an income of 80 rupees, Or say for example, if this individual is earning an income of 100 rupees, what does that mean? With the income that he have earned 100 rupees, he can afford these basic goods and services in his life, so that automatically he will be living out of the poverty. He will be living out of the poverty. Isn't it or not? Now tell me, can I take the income as a basis for defining the poverty in India? Now take the example of yourselves. The lot of people who are listening to these videos might be the aspirants, right? You might be the aspirants, you might be the permanent students. You don't have any kind of an income, but you are having all these basic goods in your life, aren't you? You are having a good food, you are having a shelter, you are having a clothing, you are having education, you have each and everything healthcare services. Aren't you affording all these basic goods and services in your life without having any kind of an income? Now can you tell me, now if I take the income as a measure to define the poverty in India, now can I say that each and every one of you, most of you I would say, are living in poverty? No. Instead of having any kind of an income, instead of earning any kind of an income, you are affording all these basic goods and services in your life. Now, it is not an appropriate thing to take the income as a measure to define the poverty in India, but it is the expenditure. That we should take as a measure to calculate the poverty in India. Now, let me give an example for you. Now, in the above example, now what is the poverty line here? That is 100 rupees. What does that mean? Those who can afford 100 can afford the basic goods and services. Those who afford the basic goods and services said to be living above poverty. Those who cannot afford it said to be living below poverty. Now let's keep this example in mind. Let's try to discuss why we don't take income as a measure to calculate the poverty in India. Why we take the expenditure as a measure to calculate poverty in India. Now say for example, now imagine he's a father. Now here we have the mother, and here we have three siblings. Now let's consider this father is earning an income of 500 rupees. Now what does that mean? If I calculate the poverty by using the income based method, then definitely this father is definitely out of the poverty, because he just need 100 rupees for the basic goods and services, but in spite of that he is earning an income of 500 rupees, so automatically he will be living out of the poverty. Now what about these 4 children? What about this wife, and what about these 3 dependents? All these people are called dependents. We call them as dependents, right? What about these people? In spite of not earning any money, they can have all these basic goods and services required for their survival in their life. So automatically, instead of having an income, they are affording the basic goods and services, so they are said to be living out of the poverty. But how to define them? Now understand. See, the father is earning an income of 500. Now this 500 is distributed among this wife and the 3 siblings here. Say for example, each and every person is making an expenditure of 100 rupees over here. Right? Now in such a way, by making an expenditure, you can have all the basic goods and services required for your survival in the life. So automatically, instead of income, you take the expenditure as a basis for calculating the poverty, and you will get a true picture. Imagine yourselves, guys. You might ask some money from your parents. You will ask some money from your parents. You are going to have the books, the basic goods and services required for your life, day-to-day life from your parents, right? So in spite of earning any income, you just distributing or just taking your parents' income and making it as an expenditure and having the basic goods and services required for your life. So if I take expenditure as a measure to calculate the poverty, I will get the true picture of the poverty in India. Not only in India, in every world, in every part of the world. So that's the reason why instead of income-based method is used to calculate poverty, the expenditure method is used to calculate the poverty all over the world. I hope you understood the things very clearly here. So I hope you understood what is the meaning of poverty, what is the income-based method, and what is the expenditure method. Why we take, instead of income, why you take the expenditure, I hope it is very clear. It is because of the dependents such as children, and there might be old age people. We have the old age people, right? We have the old age people, even they don't earn an income. Now there come from this particular point, we have the current affair. These old age people are dependent people. They are dependent on the income earned by their son, earned by their daughter, They are dependent on the income. In most of the cases, they might be dependent upon the savings amount, what they have saved during their entire life till their retirement. Or in most of the cases in the rural areas, they might be dependent on their son, or they might be dependent on their daughter. Right? Because of this dependency nature of these individuals, they are being pushed into the poverty. Now, you imagine yourself as a person. Now, if you earn an income, you can afford your basic goods and services, then you can be living out of the poverty. Now, if you are independent, it is very easy for you to be out of the poverty. Now, if you are not independent and if you are dependent on someone else, then what is the situation? If your parents don't make you to get the money, if your parents don't give you the money to buy the books, to go to a coaching center, now if the parents don't do all these things, what will be you? Isn't it or not? Haven't you thought like this? Similarly, it is the true case even with the age-old persons, isn't it? So, when the people are more dependent, there are a lot of chances they get pushed into the poverty, right? When they are independent, there are less chances that they can be pushed into the poverty. But when they are dependent like children and old age persons, there are more chances that they can be pushed into the poverty. Now, this is the current affair that we are going to discuss right now. Now, apart from these two people, apart from the dependence reason, there are one more reason, like there are a lot of people in the country where they have some backup of assets, where they got the assets from the forefathers, inherited property, through which although they are not earning any income, they can have the basic goods and services required for their survival, so they might be living out of the poverty. So because of these people, those who have the permanent assets with them, which they have inherited, and because of the dependency nature of some people in the country, we don't take the income as a method of calculating the poverty, but instead we take expenditure as a method to calculate the poverty. I hope you understood the things very clearly here, right? Next. Now, as I said, this dependency nature of the old age people pushes them often into the poverty, because mainly they are dependent on the savings. See, these days, often due to the inflation and raised the prices, their savings amount, what they have saved throughout their life by working till 60 and 62, have been consumed very fastly. And the dependency nature of the old age persons on their children and daughter is also one of the important reasons why they get pushed out. Now let's look at the current affair. I hope I have given the basics very clearly for you. I hope you understood the concept. Now see here, just they have defined the poverty. Poverty is nothing but having enough money to meet basic needs, including food, clothing and shelter. However, poverty is much more than that. It's not having money. Poverty is not only about not making the people expenditure, but it is also about not having some healthy life, not living in peace, right? All these comes under the measure of the poverty, right? For your convenience, like for your fact, I would like to give you one more important fact here. International poverty line. International poverty line. The international poverty line is given by the World Bank, and it defines the poverty. Say for example, here in the above example, what is the poverty line for us? It is nothing but 100 rupees. According to the World Bank, the poverty line is about $1.90 US per day. What does it mean? Those persons who can make an expenditure of $1.90 US per day is said to be living above the poverty, and those who can't said to be living below poverty. And one more thing for you guys, see, the poverty line varies from state to state. Why? The poverty line varies from state to state in India. Why? Because the basic goods and services required for the survival might be different in the northern India, might be different in southern India, it might differ from region to region. Then how come we can have a single kind of a poverty line all over the country? So that's the reason why we have the poverty line being diversified from the state to state. But for the comparison of the poverty all over the regions in the country, we will formulate a single poverty line. I hope you understood that. Now when we look at the current affair, see, the oldest aged 80 years or over, are less able to work, you know that, than the younger, right? They have more likely to spend their savings and are most in need of age-appropriate health and long-term personal care services. They don't try to understand the paradox here. On one hand, they don't have the income, right? On one hand, they don't have the income. On the other hand, they are using their savings amount, and on the other hand, their revenue kind of an expenditure on this kind of health and long-term personal care is also increasing very highly, right? Deteriorating brain and muscle capacity are largely non-negotiable facts of the life, and we know that, and limiting one's ability to get a job and remain employed. It's not possible for each and everyone to get employed all over the time. So that's the reason why we have a retirement age. Right? I hope you understood this. Now, when we look at the reasons for the old age poverty, see here. A large section of the senior people in India is still dependent on a joint family setup for their senior care and post-retirement needs. As I said, dependency of the old age people pushing them deep into the poverty day by day, right? Now, next, high population. An increase in the number of seniors in India will reduce the percentage of India's human resource capital and its ability to drive the economic growth. See guys, if a person is young, if he is healthy enough, if he is trained enough and he is educated enough, then only he can become a human capital. Today, most of the economists and scholars all over the world are talking about the demographic dividend of India, aren't they? They are talking about the demographic dividend of India. But what is the situation of the demographic dividend of the country? They are lacking in the education. They are lacking in the skills. Only just 3% of the engineers who gets passed out has the ability to get directly inducted into the factories. Now, when they don't have enough skill and experience and training, how can they be converted into the demographic dividend? That's the one problem. Now, when the demographic dividend is very high, that means working age population, 15 to 59 years population is very high currently in India. Definitely, these kind of a population is going to get old after a period of time. Then India would be a country where we have a lot of old age people. Isn't it or not? Now, it is another important reason which might push most of the people in India into poverty in the future. Right? Next, we have a very low insurance penetration. Now, in the foreign countries, if you ask someone, like they might have their personal insurance, they might have different kinds of insurance for them. But unluckily in India, we don't have enough penetration of the insurance sector, right? Except for the vehicles, motor vehicles. See, personal insurance is not a great thing in India. This highlights the inadequacy and underscores the critical need to streamline the retirement planning schemes and strengthen the pension programs in the country. There is a lack of social security framework. You know, even after 2004, we don't have the pensions for the government retired employees. Right? Now, this is the situation, guys. Like I said, reasons for the old age poverty, dependency is one of the main reasons. And apart from that, high population, low insurance penetrations. Now, what is the need of the hour? Like this is your mains orientation topic. Like from here, it is your mains orientation. Like universal pension program, it would be a very good thing. It provides an opportunity for Indians to create a universal pension program for its 1.3 billion people. Like financial incentives, there is a pressing need to promote and facilitate fiscal planning in the early years and supplement it with the senior-friendly tax structures. Senior-friendly tax structures. So you have to keep these kind of words in your mind. Like if you possible, try to note them down and try to use it in your mains. And regulatory mechanism will set a viable base rate for the interest accrued for the senior citizens deposits. You know, see, all along their working age, they are going to save the money. Now they are going to get some interest in their savings deposits. Now, it would be a better thing that we increase a savings rate interest rate for the senior citizens. Of course, even these days, the savings rate deposit rates for the senior citizens is of course very high, but it need to be increased, right? Now, these are the need of the hour. These can be done, right? Now, this is about this old age poverty is getting worse and it need to be addressed soon, right? I hope you understood these things. We have discussed about the basics of poverty. You have understood what is the difference between income-based calculating poverty or an expenditure-based calculating poverty, and why the old age people are pushing more into the poverty, because the main reason is their dependency and lack of penetration and high population, lack of penetration of the social insurance schemes and the high population growth rate. I hope you understood the concept very clearly, and we also discussed about the need of the hour, right? Now, next topic what we have today is this. India's tax to GDP growth ratio, tax to GDP ratio might be very high, might be too high. See, I will explain you something very clearly here. Now, see, imagine these might be the people. Imagine these are the people. Now, these people are going to save their money in the banks. Now, say for example, they have saved their money in the banks in such a way. Now, what is this bank is going to do? Say for example, the people cumulatively altogether saved an amount of 10 lakh rupees. Saved an amount of 10 lakh rupees in the bank. Now what this bank is going to do? It is going to provide this 10 lakh rupees as a loan to the entrepreneur. Say for example, it is provided as 5 lakh rupees to each. 5 lakhs to each. Now with this, let's consider these people have established factories. Say for example, they have established a book manufacturing factory, and an IT service. And you know, these services, these are labor intensive. So he employed, the book manufacturing company is a secondary sector, it's a labor intensive sector. So they employed 3 people. And this IT sector is not that labor intensive. So they have they have employed 2 people. These 2 people, right? These 3 people have worked here and received the salary, and they have demanded the IT services. These 2 people worked here and received the salary, and they have demanded the books. Say for example, 10 books are produced and each book value added is 10 rupees, and 10 services are produced and each services value added is 20. You know, the value addition for the services sector is very much high when compared to the primary sector and secondary sector. So we have the 100 here, the GDP, and here we have the 200. Cumulatively, what do we have? We have a GDP of 300 rupees here. Right? Now, have you understood this scenario? If you observe this entire diagram, what you have understood? The savings. So guys, what is the amount of investments here made? 10 lakh rupees. Don't you think if the money invested here increases to 20 lakh rupees, if it increases to 20 lakh rupees, don't you think the proxy GDP here might get increased to 600 rupees? Isn't it or not? Now, don't you think that total employment created here is 5? Now, if it is increased to 20 lakh, don't you think it is going to increase the employment rate to 10 here? If 10 people, earlier only 5 people have the purchasing capacity to purchase the goods and services. They are working there, they are receiving the salary. With that receiving salary, they have the purchasing power to purchase the goods and services in the economy. Now, if 10 people have that capacity, they will demand more goods and services. If the people demands more goods, and demand means they will try to purchase. If the people demands more goods and services, automatically the GDP of the country, you know, the final monetary value of the goods and services produced in the economy is called GDP. So if the 10 people have the purchasing capacity, they are going to demand more goods. Say for example, see, these guys are going to pay 2 types of taxes to the people, to the government. Say for example, they can pay the direct taxes. Imagine if their income is above the threshold of the 5 lakh rupees, they are going to pay the income tax to the government, direct tax. Now, these people are going to demand the goods and services upon which they will pay the GST, which is an indirect tax to the government. In such a way, with the investment, see, we have each and everything is interlinked, guys. The savings rate is linked here, the investments, the capital formation, the GDP, the employment creation, each and everything is interlinked, right? Isn't it? Now, if the 10 people have the purchasing capacity, don't you think the GDP of the country is going to get increased to 600, and they are going to contribute more kind of a direct taxes and indirect taxes to the government, right? Isn't it or not? So savings in an economy, so that's the reason why the savings in an economy is considered as investment, right? Investment. And with the investment, we have the capital formation. With the capital formation, we get the employment. And with the employment, increases the purchasing capacity of the people. And if the purchasing capacity of the people increases, it increases the demand for goods and services. If the demand for goods and services increases, it automatically increases the GDP. Now, in such a way, each and everything is interlinked in the economy. Each and everything is interlinked in the economy. So, I hope you understood all these things. So, just keep it in your mind, guys. Right? Now, when we look at the current affairs, see, most of the people all around the world believes that some leading economic commentators both in India and abroad believes that it is that our tax to GDP ratio is lower than what it should be. Many of the people believes that this low tax to GDP ratio is blamed for low rate of investment. I hope I have given the link. Now, I hope you can understand all these statements very clearly. The low tax to GDP, if the investments is more, the employment generation is more, purchasing capacity will be high, then the people will demand the goods and services. If the people demand more goods and services, they will pay both the direct taxes and indirect taxes. If the investment itself is low, the capital formation will be low, the demand for the goods and services will be low, automatically low tax to GDP ratio for the government. I hope with that example you can understand these things. So, low tax to GDP ratio is blamed for the low rate of investment. Low rate of investment, higher fiscal deficits. You know the meaning of fiscal deficits. We have discussed it in the previous classes. The outstanding liabilities of the government at the end of the financial year is called the fiscal deficits. To express it in a formulaic way, the total expenditure minus total receipts other than the borrowings is called the fiscal deficit. Say for example, the government wants to make an expenditure of 100 rupees and it got a revenue of 97 and then it just borrowed 3 rupees. So, formulaic way, the expenditure minus total receipts other than borrowings is called the fiscal deficits, and technically this 3 rupees what they have borrowed at the end of the financial year is called the fiscal deficits. And all these are interlinked together, just now we have understood in the example. So, there are 3 important fiscal variables in the economy, that is taxes, fiscal deficits and debt, and these 3 are interlinked. Lower tax revenue means higher fiscal deficit, lower level of expenditures, low capital formation, each and everything is low. So, right, when each and everything is low, automatically the revenue expenditure. See guys, whenever the government wants to make an expenditure, say for example, it wants to make an expenditure of 100. So automatically, if it makes 80% of the revenue expenditure and 20% is capital expenditure, how do you expect the capital formation being happening in the economy? If there is no enough capital formation, how do you expect the people will get the employment? If the people don't get the employment, can we expect the purchasing power of the people? If we don't have the purchasing power, how can you expect these people to demand the goods and services? When each and every state, recently we have seen the RBI data in the previous economic weekly series also, we have analyzed about it, where the states such as Andhra Pradesh is going for about 88.8% of the revenue expenditure, and the states such as Kerala is going for 90% of the revenue expenditure. When there is no capital expenditure, then there is no capital formation. When there is no capital formation, there is no enough employment generation. When there is no enough employment generation, there is no enough purchasing capacity. When there is no enough purchasing capacity, there is no enough demand for the goods, automatically low amount of taxes. I hope you have understood, and this, I think with this example itself you have understood all these things, right? So when we look at, so all 3 directly or indirectly are assumed to affect the growth and inflation, right? Now when we look at the India's perspective, see, 2 common observations on the tax to GDP ratio for India is, the first, it is low for around just 10 to 11% of the GDP, and it has stayed at close level for the last 20 years. And in the last previous economic weekly series also we have discussed about the jobless growth. We have discussed about the jobless growth. Although the GDP of the country is increasing, what is the meaning of jobless growth? Although the GDP of the country is increasing, the equivalent number or equivalent amount of the jobs have been not creating in India. Now, why it is done? Because the growth currently is led by the services sector. Services sector is not a labor intensive sector, so that's the reason. Although I already told you the value addition for the services sector is very high. So when the services sector is leading the GDP, so GDP is increasing. But services sector is not labor intensive, so that equivalent amount of labor or employment generation is not happening. Second important reason, India have just missed the train of the industrial revolution, right? So we have discussed about these things in our previous economic weekly series. I hope you remember all these things. So that's the another important reason why the tax to GDP, right, just stick to 10 to 11% of the GDP. In 2019, it hit a decade low of 10% of the GDP, as same as in 2014, right? When we look at the next comparing, if we just compare with our peers, so peer countries, it is very low for us. When we compare it with the peers, like it is very low for us. So hence the logic dictates that we should strive automatically. When the tax to GDP of the country is very low, automatically it is going to be increased. Because see guys, when the tax to GDP is automatically low, it is going to show some inequalities in the economy. The wealth that is held by the people might be different. 10%. Recently we have seen the data that a private organization have released this data, like about 1% of the population in India is holding 10% of the wealth, and 10% of the population is holding about 60 to 60% of the wealth. Now in these scenarios, in these situations, so tax to GDP ratio, increasing the purchasing power of the people, increasing the income of the people is the need of the hour. So in such a way, we should concentrate on the labor intensive sectors, right? Labor intensive sectors such as the industrial sector, the Make in India initiative, the Startup India, Stand Up India initiative, all these initiatives of the government of India is very much in right? Very much in consonance with increasing the employment generation in India, so that both the GDP grows as well as their employment generation grows, as well as if the employment generation grows, they will have their purchasing capacity and they will provide both the direct taxes and indirect taxes to the government on the other hand. So in such a way, we have more tax to GDP ratio. I hope you understood all these things, right? Now before we conclude, say this is about the current affair, but before we conclude, guys, remember this interlinks. This interlinkaging of the things in the economy is very much important. If possible, try to pause the video or try to rewind and look at the video and try to note them, right? Try to note them. Always try to give these kind of an examples in your mains answers. It will give some freshness to your answers. Examiner will feel fresh and it have a lot of chances to explain. These kind of a diagrams have a lot of scope to explain the things to the examiner. It will be very easy for him, very easy for him. Now these kind of a flow charts are also very much important. Just try to note them down, okay? Next, right? Before that, I would just like to conclude with saying the tax buoyancy and tax elasticity, which is related to this particular current affair in this topic, right? Now, what is the meaning of tax elasticity and tax buoyancy? It's very simple, guys. Very simple. See, both tax elasticity and tax buoyancy going to have the same formula. It's nothing but the percentage change in tax revenue by percentage change in GDP. Percentage change in tax revenue by percentage change in GDP. Now, you know the meaning of change in GDP. Now, say for example, today the GDP is 100, but the next year the GDP, if it increases to 110, the change in GDP is 10%. Now, if it would decrease to 90 rupees, the change in GDP is 10% decreased. 10% increased. Change means it may be increased or it may be decreased. Now, what is the reasons why we have the change in tax revenue? So, change in tax revenue happens due to two reasons. So, first, automatic reasons. The second one is, right, is the first one. The second one is discretionary reasons. You know the meaning of automatic reasons. Just now we have discussed about these automatic reasons here. See, in this example, you can clearly observe if the capital formation, if the savings rate in the economy is high, it is going to provide more and more loans. If the savings rate is high, it is going to provide more loans, and if the loans are high, it is more investment. When the investment is high, it increases the capital formation. If the capital formation is high, it provides more and more employment. If it provides more and more employment, it is going to make the people have enough purchasing power and they demand the goods and services, and more taxes will be coming to the government. It is called change in tax revenue. Or if the savings rate falls, say for example, in this above example, if the investments falls to 5 lakh rupees just, now automatically the GDP might fall to 150 rupees and the taxes for the government also might decrease, right? In such a way, due to the automatic reasons in the economy, the tax revenue for the government may be increased, tax revenue for the government may be decreased. This is called change in tax revenue automatically. I hope you understood this. Now, there is another reason why the change in taxes happens. There is the discretionary changes. Discretionary changes are of two types: change in tax rate, the change in coverage. Say for example, what is the meaning of change in tax rate? Say for example, today on 100 rupees of good, the tax rate is 10%. The tax amount for the government might be 10. If they increases the tax rate to 20%, tax revenue for the government is 20 rupees, isn't it or not? If they increases the tax revenue or decreases in the tax revenue, change in tax revenue happens, isn't it or not? So this is the discretionary change. This is the discretionary action performed by the government. So with these discretionary actions, the change in tax revenue will be happening for the government. Now, second one is the coverage. Imagine, for your convenience, for example, imagine these are tax bases. Now, what is the meaning of tax base? Tax base is something, to put it simply for you, the tax base means what gets taxed. Tax base means what gets taxed. In the case of excise duty means it's a tax imposed on the production of goods and services. Now, in case of excise duty, the tax base is production of goods and services. In case of income tax, the income earned by the individual is the tax base. So, technically, what is getting taxed is called tax base. Imagine all these dots what I have written here is called tax bases. Now, let's consider only these tax bases are being currently taxed or only these bases are currently being brought into the ambit of taxation. Now say for example, with this the government might be receiving a tax amount of 100. Now all of a sudden the government have increased the tax basis, increased the coverage, and they have covered more and more tax bases, so that now the tax revenue for the government might increase to 200. Take the example of agriculture. Niti Aayog have recently recommended to the government of India that today, guys, I have already told you in the previous classes, the states have that one and only one power, one direct tax power, that is to impose taxes on the agricultural income. States have the power to impose the income tax on the agricultural income, and it is one and only direct tax power for the state governments given by the constitution. But fortunately, many of the states have exempted these. Most of the states have exempted the agricultural income. Now understand, if the government accepts the Niti Aayog recommendations and if it starts taxing the rich farmers, now one tax base, agricultural income is a tax base. Now one tax base is brought into the coverage ambit of taxation. Now it is going to increase the tax rates. Now tomorrow all of a sudden, in order to encourage the taxes on the students' laptops might be exempted by the government. So automatically the tax revenue coming from the students' laptops will be decreased. So this is called either by bringing some tax bases into the ambit of taxation or by removing some tax bases from the ambit of taxation, we can have the coverage, change in coverage. We call it as change in coverage. So due to this change in tax rates and change in coverage, we have the change in tax revenue either get increased or decreased. So this is called discretionary changes. Okay. For your convenience, I will give an example for you. Let's assign the values for it. Let's consider the total change in tax revenue. Change in tax revenue in the economy is, say for example, it's 30%. Now with this, automatically is, say for example, 20%, right? Automatically is 20%, and through the discretionary is 10%, and percentage change in GDP might be 10%. As remember, tax elasticity is going to consider the change in tax revenue only due to automatic reasons. Tax buoyancy is going to consider the changes in tax revenue due to both the automatic changes as well as discretionary changes, right? So if at all, if you want me to calculate the tax buoyancy, it is going to consider the change in tax revenue both due to automatic changes as well as discretionary changes. So automatic changes and discretionary changes total 30%. So 30 by percentage change in GDP, that is equal to 3. Tax buoyancy is equal to 3. Whereas the tax elasticity is going to consider the change in tax revenue happened due to automatic reasons only. So automatically the change in tax revenue is 20. So 20 by 10. So tax elasticity is equal to 2. Now, calculating the tax elasticity, tax buoyancy helps the government to achieve the targeted tax to GDP ratio. Now, with these measures, they will understand now what is the GDP, what is the tax ratio to the GDP. Now, with this calculation, they can have the targeted tax to GDP ratios. So, that's the main purpose of calculating this tax elasticity and tax buoyancy, right? I hope you understood all these concepts very clearly, right? Next. Tax buoyancy, and now you have the definitions here, tax buoyancy and tax elasticity. So I hope you understood all these macroeconomic concepts. Guys, try to pause the video and just, if you are getting confused, like just try to look at the video once again and try to note all these interlinks, which are very much important for us, for our UPSC preparation. Now let's move to the next topic. Now here we have the government, the RBI and the government must act in coordination during the economically challenging period. See guys, for any country, the growth and price stabilization. For any country, the growth and price stabilization is very much important, right? See, now, just now in the above example, we have understood one thing. Now, for your understanding, let's take another example. Let's understand, this is a bank. Now, you know what is the meaning of a repo rate. Repo rate is the rate at which RBI extends loans to the commercial banks, right? Say for example, currently the repo rate is 4%, and the inflation in the economy, know the meaning of inflation, and the inflation in the economy is 5%. Now, with the repo rate of 4% and the inflation of 5% in the economy, the bank is providing a loan of about 10 lakh. It will be taken by, as an example, it will be taken by two entrepreneurs, and they might be establishing the economic units. They might be establishing some economic units. Take the same old example, the book manufacturing factory and IT company, and they might be providing employment to 3 people here, and they might be providing employment to 2 people here, and totally they are creating a GDP of 300. See, 10 into 10 and 10 into 20. So cumulatively the GDP here is 300. Isn't it or not? Now let's take it as a case 1. Right? Now in order to enhance the GDP, say for example, in order to enhance the GDP, we need to increase the money supply. Right? Isn't it or not? See, now in order to enhance the money supply, what the RBI did is, RBI decreased the repo rate. You know, when the repo rate is decreased by the RBI, money supply in the economy will be increased. So when RBI decreased the repo rate to 2%, let's consider it is decreased to 2%. Now the money supply into the economy is going to be increased to 20 lakh. Now with that 20 lakh, the GDP, the proxy GDP is also going to get increased to 600 rupees, isn't it or not? But understand guys, earlier the inflation is 5%. Now see, earlier the demand for the goods and services is just 10 lakhs. Now the demand for the goods and services is increased to 20 lakhs. Now the people are demanding 10 lakhs extra worth of goods and services in the economy. Now when the demand for the goods and services increases, don't you think it is going to create inflation? It is going to lead to inflation. Now we have the inflation, and let's consider the inflation got increased to 7%. Now it is not only important to have the GDP growth rate in the economy, but it is also important to have the inflation in the economy. Now in such a way, this inflation, technically you know that inflation in the country should be placed between 4 plus or minus 2. So it should be measured, it should be maintained between 4 plus or minus 2. So it should not get increased to 7%. Now what is the situation? Now what RBI is going to do? Now let's consider the RBI had increased this inflation rate to this repo rate to 4.5%. Now with the inflation, with the repo rate increased to 4.5%, now let's consider the money supply in the economy might get decreased to 15 lakh rupees, and the GDP might be here. What might be the GDP here? The GDP here might be 450 rupees, and the inflation might come down to inflation. When earlier the demand for the goods and services is 20 lakhs, now it is decreased by 5 lakh rupees. So automatically when the demand decreases, automatically inflation decreases. So the inflation rate might come to 5%. So now both the inflation and the growth is in control. So by using the key repo, now understand, now try to understand. RBI, by using these kind of tools, repo tools, implement the monetary policy. Now we call it as a monetary policy of RBI. Implements the monetary policy to achieve both the growth as well as price stabilization. We call it as price stabilization. Controlling the inflation is price stabilization. Similarly, Government of India is also having 2 tools, taxes and expenditure. It all see guys, if government decreases the taxes, the disposable income available with the people is going to get increased. If the disposable income increases, they will demand more goods and services. If they demand more goods and services, automatically comes the inflation. Similarly, if the government goes for more and more expenditure, the people will have more money, they will demand the goods and services, inflation increases. Like in such a way, both the taxes and expenditure are the 2 tools available for the government to achieve the same twin objectives of growth and price stabilization. In such a way, now we call it as a monetary policy of the RBI. Now we call it as a fiscal policy of the Government of India. So that's what the current affair is all about. That's what the current affair is all about. See, look at the heading. RBI and government, RBI, government must act in coordination during economically challenging periods, because currently we are in an economically challenging period where the inflation rate is getting very higher these days. It is just crossed the 6%, and recently we have seen that the repo rate is increased by the RBI and it is just placed at 5.4%. It is in its latest meeting, the members of the Monetary Policy Committee voted unanimously to increase the policy repo rate by 50 basis point to 5.4%. Now why the title says the RBI and government must work in a coordination? Because see, ensuring the money supply, like we have understood in the example, ensuring the money supply, now here that money supply in our example is 10 lakh rupees. See, ensuring the money supply in an economy is very much important to ensure the growth of the economy. See, by case 3, you can clearly observe the inflation rate is in the control, and also the GDP is increased to 450. So the GDP increased to 300, from 300 to 450. So we can clearly observe the GDP growth rate, and we have the inflation is in control. Understand the paradox, guys. On one hand, RBI has the responsibility to control the inflation, so it increases or decreases the money supply. Now the growth of the country is very much concerned by the ruling parties. The growth of the country is a much concern for the government, which is very much dependent on the money supply in the economy. On one hand, the money supply will be controlled by the RBI in order to control the inflation. On the other hand, money supply should be there in order to enhance the growth, which is very much important task for the government of India. So government needs the growth, RBI need to control the inflation. So due to these kind of situations, it is done on one hand, government need the growth, RBI need to control the inflation. So they should work in coordination with one another so that the inflation will be coming down. On the other hand, the growth will be sustained, like in our case 3. I hope you understood this concept very well. This is what about the other saying. Both the government, you can see the title, both RBI and government must act in coordination during the economically challenging period. This is the economical challenging period currently we are in, where the growth rate is not very high and we have the inflation rates at very high. It is not only the case with the India, guys. Even if you see the USA, even in the USA, we have a 10 years high of inflation rate. Their inflation in fact went to 9% and they have increased the key interest rates. So that's the reason many of the investors from the stock markets in India have been pulling out to the USAs. Now we have discussed about what is the reason, what is the interlinkage between the USA Federal Reserves increasing the interest rates and pushing out or pulling out of the investors out of the Indian markets. We have discussed about these things. We have discussed about the interlink between these things in our previous economic weekly series. So by that you can understand this is not a phenomenon not only happening in the Indian economy but also in the world economy, which is further aggravated by the Russian and Ukraine crisis. I hope you understood all these things, right? So see, and so in effect RBI's policy has not only been more normalized but has actually tightened. What is the meaning of tightened monetary policy? If the RBI increases the repo rate, decreases the money supply, we call it as a tight monetary policy, tightening the money supply. If RBI reduces the repo rate, increases the money supply, we call it as a easy monetary policy, easing the money supply. I hope you understood all these things. Now recently, in order to see, when there is enough money supply in the economy, the people are going to demand the goods and services. When the people demand goods and services, it is going to create the inflation. Inflation simply means rise in the prices. Now, in order to suck out the extra inflation, extra money in the economy, the RBI came up with the standing deposit facility. See, even though the standing deposit facility. What is the meaning of standing deposit facility? Now guys, understand. We have the reverse repo rate. What is the meaning of reverse repo rate? It is the rate that RBI provides to the commercial banks for the money they places with the RBI. Isn't it or not? Say for example, here we have the RBI and here we have the bank. Now if the bank places the money with the RBI, the RBI is going to provide a rate to the banks and we call it as a reverse repo rate. It is the rate that RBI provides to the commercial banks for the money they kept with the RBI. But you know, under RBI Act of 1934, each and every, the repos and reverse repo operations of the RBI and with the commercial banks should have a purchasing and repurchasing agreements with respect to the mortgaged government securities. Now, say for example, if RBI, say for example, here we have the SBI bank. Now, if the SBI bank wants a loan of about 10,000 crores from the RBI, the equivalent amount of the government securities need to be mortgaged with the RBI by this SBI. Now, this is a procedure for the repo operations which is mandated by the RBI Acts, right? Now, tell me guys, see, now let's go back to the decade, let's go back to the age where we have the demonetization being happened in the economy. During demonetization, what happened in the economy? Many of the people have deposited their banknotes into the banks. Isn't it or not? Because they are no more a legal tender when are declared by our Prime Minister. Each and everybody have deposited their banknotes in the bank. So now the banks are loaded with the money supply. They have the money supply from the front, back and all sides. They have loaded the money supply. Now upon all this money supply, you know, your savings bank account is also going to pay some interest rates for you. Now it will be a very important burden. It will be a huge burden for the banks to pay the interest rates. Now in order to pay the interest rate, what a commercial bank is going to do? The commercial bank usually takes your money, provide it as a loan at a very high interest rate to the entrepreneur, collects the interest rates and pays a basic saving rates to you, and the margin is in their profits. That's how the commercial banks works. Now during the demonetization situation, we at least can't withdraw our money what we have saved in the banks, then no case of the loans at all, right? Now what to do with the money? Now from each and every corner the banks are receiving the money. Now what is to do with the money? They have the two options. Either they can lend to the public or they can place it with the RBI under the reverse repo rate. They can't lend it to the public, right? During that situation, they can place it with the RBI at a reverse repo rate. Now tell me guys, see, not only for the repo operations, even for the reverse repo operations, say for example, if SBI places 10,000 crores with the RBI need to provide equivalent amount of government securities to the SBI. Now, do you think there are about 14 lakh crores of money being circulated during that period in India? Do you think the RBI have that much amount of government bonds to made a repurchasing agreements with the rest of the commercial banks? No. So during that season, we have the origination of the standing deposit facility in the economy. Understand, under the reverse repo rate, we need to mortgage the government securities. Now here in the SDF standing deposit facility is going to work in the same way like the reverse repo rate is going to work in the economy. Right? So, but the only difference is there we have the purchasing and repurchasing of the government dated securities, but in the reverse deposit, in the standing deposit facility, we don't need to do that. Right? Just banks can place their money with the RBI under the standing deposit facility like they have deposited their money under the reverse repo rate. But the only difference is in the reverse repo operations, we have the mortgaging of government securities. In the standing deposit facility, we don't need that. Right? Right? You know the reason. RBI don't have enough, RBI, not any bank. The banks usually have a limited amount of government securities, not a huge amount of government securities. So, see, the main purpose of SDA is to reduce the excess liquidity in the system and control inflation. See, an additional tool to observe liquidity. So, understand. So, under the standing deposit facility, the banks can place their money with the RBI. So, when the banks places their money with the RBI, the banks don't have enough money to lend the money to the people. When there is no enough money, so in such a way, the people don't have enough money and they don't demand the goods and services, inflation will come down. In such a way, it is going to work. Now, this is very much important point here. You need to remember, by removing the binding collateral constraint on the RBI, that's what we have explained. That's what we have discussed so far. By removing the binding collateral constraint on RBI, the SDF standing deposit facility strengthens the operating framework of the monetary policy of RBI. Right? So, just now we have discussed about it. This is about the standing deposit facility and you can have the rates here. The SDF rate will be 25 basis points. 100 basis point is 1%. Below the policy rate repo rate, and it will be applicable to overnight deposits at this stage. So, in such a way, we have this standing deposit facility. So, what is the context? Government need the growth, RBI need to control the inflation. Both are interlinked. So, government and RBI need to work in a coordination so that both the growth is achieved in the economy and price stabilization is happened in the economy, like we have understood in our case 3. Right? 450 is more than 300 rupees, isn't it or not? 450 of GDP is more than 350. On the other hand, so the government will be satisfied here. The inflation rate is well within the limits. It is just 5%, which is less than 6%. Inflation is also in their control. So in such a way, they need to work together in coordination with one another so that they will achieve the twin objectives of both the monetary policy and fiscal policy, that is achieving the growth and achieving the price stabilization in the economy. Right? I hope I have given the good knowledge about all these things. So guys, these are the latest current affairs which we have seen in the newspapers. So we have discussed about the poverty, age-old poverty in the concepts. We have discussed about the tax to GDP ratio of the India. We have discussed about the interlinks and mechanism, and we have discussed about the RBI and government working coordination. So all these are like macroeconomic concepts, guys. A good understanding of macroeconomic concepts is very much important to attempt both the prelims as well as mains. So I hope you have understood all this class, and I also enjoyed this class. So this is all about for the day. And similarly, we are going to look at the current affairs of economy in the next week, which appeared in the different newspapers. So till then, stay tuned to Rathod's IAS. Thank you.